New business, agenda item G, and the first is the zoning board of appeals, filling of the vacancy, Charles D'Antonio retiring from the zoning board of appeals. And with that, I'll open it up to discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we appoint John Mastriani as who's currently the first alternate to the position of zoning board member.
I'll second that.
I would make that unanimous, being the longest-serving alternate.
And there remains, as a result, there remains both a full board complement and 2 alternates.
Correct.
And we can look at the talent bank application for a future meeting and
The next
see.
meeting.
Okay, great.
Next new business is, Charles, has you come up Pro Verde Laboratories regarding the host agreement?
Thank you.
Thanks.
The change list? Oh, the 2 of them.
Just background information.
Okay.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So, gentlemen, just as a matter of brief background, Pro Verde already operates a marijuana testing facility here in Milford, has done so for a number of years, and apparently has done so successfully and without significant adverse impact to the community. They're now seeking to get licensed pursuant to regulations promulgated by the newly established Cannabis Control Commission. So this is a new process both for municipalities as well as to the providers. I probably don't have to inform you, but I will, simply to make sure that we're all on the same page on this, that they are doing only testing, they're not doing retail sales, they're not doing cultivation, and their testing will be needed so that cultivators and retailers can in fact get their licenses to sell. So they approached us looking for a host community agreement. It's not a concept which is unknown to the town of Milford already. We've engaged in discussions with Pro Verde in the past, as well as Sera Naturals regarding these agreements or these sorts of agreements. However, this agreement is a little bit different because it is absolutely required by the Cannabis Control Commission that each licensee obtain and have signed a host community agreement with their host community, in this case, Milford, the town of Milford. And pursuant to their promulgated regulations, there are certain things which need to be, are mandated to be within the agreement, and there are other things which could be in the agreement. So the agreement that has been proposed to us is in front of you now for your review. As you can see, marijuana establishment, both under state law as well as our zoning, includes marijuana testing facilities. This particular site, as you probably are aware, is located at 420 Fortune Boulevard in Milford. They're required, again, I'm just going to call your attention to the second whereas paragraph on the second page. They're required to execute an agreement with the host community, which is why they're here tonight, or we're here tonight to talk about this. If we are to grant them a host community agreement, it doesn't mean that they necessarily get their license. Their licensure is still contingent upon approval by the Cannabis Control Commission. Excuse me. It's merely that we, the host community, understand that what they're doing, and we are assenting to it under the terms and conditions contained in the agreement. There is general provision in this contract for cooperation with the host community. It also mandates that the licensee will provide us with copies of all of their filings with the Cannabis Control Commission and the state. It's a 5-year, it contemplates a 5-year agreement, which is the maximum that's allowed under the regulations. terminating sometime in 2023. They will work with the town to establish a comprehensive diversion prevention plan. That's a very formalized way of saying basically they'll work with the police in town to make sure that marijuana being tested at the facility doesn't disappear from the facility and enter into, you know, the black market, so to speak, an unregulated, untested bit of marijuana. They'll file a security plan, an emergency response plan. So if there's a fire and they do house chemicals, they'll tell us what chemicals they have in what quantities and where within the facility. So if there is a conflagration or some calamity and we have to send our first responders in, they'll know what they're dealing with and how to combat it. They propose to operate for 24 hours. And one of the things that is an option for them to provide, and they do it here, is to promote local hiring. So there'll be a preference in their hiring for Milford residents, Milfordians in particular. But of course, they can hire from the outside, and if there's nobody available with the requisite qualifications, they can hire outside too, but they, again, will have a preference for hiring Milfordians. They can sign the agreement with our consent, and that's essentially the agreement in a nutshell. What we're accustomed as a town to seeing is an agreement whereby, in addition to all of the things that they propose, that they also give us a chunk of money to be used by the community, in the community, for the benefit of the citizens of the community. That is not the case any longer under these sorts of host community agreements. It is not the situation where we can just ask for an impact fee and not have it related to some specific benefit that we provide them or some specific impact that's imposed on the community. And just so that you can see that this isn't something of Pro Verde's creation nor of my creation, I have also given you tonight, mine is highlighted. I didn't highlight yours because I don't want to encourage you to skim it. I'd like you to take a look at it at some point. But I've given you the guidance on host community agreements that has been promulgated by the Cannabis Control Commission. And in there at the beginning, in that Section 3D of Chapter 94G, it says that the community impact fee shall be reasonably related to the costs imposed on a municipality by the operation of the establishment. And it can't be more than 3% of gross sales. Well, again, they're not doing gross sales per se, they're doing testing, but they would have gross profits, presumably of some sort. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. The fee has to be voluntary in nature, and going back, now this is on the following page, it says the fee must be related to a benefit received by the establishment, which is not received by the general public, or to compensate the municipality for the cost of providing the benefit. So such costs that we might look at would be shown on the second to last page. Traffic intersection designs, if this was a retail establishment and there was going to be a tremendous traffic impact, police details, any environmental impact, public safety personnel that are required for whatever reason, substance abuse prevention programming during the first years of operation, which would be presumably the first 5 years. So when Pro Verde approached us in the first instance to enter into a host community agreement, this is, as we understand it from their representation, this is the thing that they need. This is the impediment to their receipt of a license. Once they have established a host community agreement, they'll be able to go to the Cannabis Control Commission, represent that their host community agreement has been executed and it is in place, and that's the last thing they need for final review and approval, which they think they might get in a matter of weeks once this is in place. So we've talked to them a little bit. They're very willing to cooperate with the town. They want to work with our schools. They have suggested that they will give an infusion of capital of some sort to promote scientific study in the high school. They will open themselves up to potential internships, potentially tours of their site, exhibits of how they process and test the marijuana, things of that nature. They sent me an email at our request. This email is from Tuesday. It talks about the fact that they're sponsoring Claflin Hill Symphony Orchestra and other things, and they're willing to work with us in other ways to promote cooperation with the town. What we don't see is a number, a financial number that they're willing to offer to us, but it's been suggested that although it may not be something as an impact fee under the community host agreement, they'd still be willing to work with us to make some sort of contribution to promote scientific study in the schools. So, all in all, it's a very kind of standard boilerplate agreement that they presented to us. They are at the same time negotiating, or the firm that represents Pro Verde is negotiating similar host agreements with other communities in the state. I think overall, as a host agreement, it's okay. Is it something that gives us a lot of teeth? No. And so, for that reason, I'm encouraging you to approve it, but I'm suggesting that what you might want to do is on, these are unnumbered pages, but if I could say the third page from the end, there are a bunch of bullet points on this regulatory guidance from the Cannabis Control Commission. One is that they'll implement a method such as a keypad, electronic access card, or other method for controlling access to areas in which marijuana products are kept. Okay, they're going to be required to do this anyway under the Code of Mass Regulations, but I'd like to have that language specified also in our community host agreement, so it is separately enforceable by us. Down the second to last paragraph, the municipality agrees to work with the company, and the company agrees to assist with community support, public outreach, and employee outreach programs. We don't have that in our agreement. It's somewhat easy language to add in. It's something that we get, and having it in the agreement is better than not having it in the agreement, because if it's in the agreement, it's enforceable. So I would recommend that slight change. And then the final paragraph, which I think is probably the most important of all of these, is the company would work with us to participate in municipally sponsored educational programs on public health, drug abuse prevention geared towards public health and public safety personnel. I could easily see Pro Verde working with our Board of Health to talk about substance abuse, addiction, and things like that, and getting some programs off the ground. What those programs would be, I think, would be up to the Board of Health and Pro Verde to decide. But I think if we have, they've already represented that they're willing to do this. I just want the language that we've talked about, the language that is somewhat referred to in their email. I'd like it in the agreement.
Codified, yeah.
Yeah, if you folks would agree to the basic agreement as it's been presented, what I would suggest is that we could sign it with the understanding of the condition that I make those counter proposals to Pro Verde, and they agree to them, and we can take the signature page, take the amended host agreement with the additional terms in it, and make it into one comprehensive document that would then be the final version of it. But I'd like some direction from the Board of Selectmen to tell me that that's what you'd like to see in the agreement. If there's anything else that I haven't covered, anything else that I've missed, that you'd like to see or that you'd like to talk about, we welcome that too. And if that's the case, we can simply just say to Pro Verde that we'd like further discussion. We could also have them come here themselves if you see fit to answer your questions. But I think for the most part, what they're providing to us is what you would expect to see in a community host agreement, although it's bare bones, but it's what you'd expect.
Open it up to discussion. Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the fact that marijuana is legal in Massachusetts makes me want to see 100 laboratories approved for testing to make sure that what the public's receiving is safe, it's without pesticides, it's without some of the problems they've seen in other states and what you might see with black market marijuana. With that said, when I look at the types of things that a host community agreement, and more specifically, what it might mitigate, I frankly don't have a lot of concerns personally that a lab is going to have undue traffic concerns, is going to maintain large quantities of the product. I think understanding good laboratory practices and how samples are taken, they're not always and rarely of any substantial quantity or bulk. So with that said, I have, frankly, your suggestions, I think, are good ones. And if the Pro Verde has already told you that they're inclined to do some of those things, I don't think it hurts to get it codified. So I think your suggestion is inherently a good one to, in my personal view, sign the host community agreement, as there are no substantial secondary effects to mitigate, and allow for the natural course of that discussion, allow them to submit to the state for license with that signed agreement, and we can always do an amendment to the types of things that you've talked about in codifying the agreement of things they've already indicated they're willing to do. So I'm in favor of signing this as is, as you suggested. I'm in favor of you looking to get the other things that they've talked about codified, and I'm ready to move on.
Well,
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I feel a very similar way. At one point, I didn't even think we were going to be doing host agreements with anyone else other than retailers, which I understand and support what we did with Sierra. Yeah, I don't have any concerns. I've been here. I've toured the facility. It's already very secure and everything of that nature. So whatever they need to tighten up, I'm sure they will. And if we can, again, support the language and the recommendations you're making, Charles, I'm fine with that. This shouldn't be, we're not dealing with the dollar amount, nor should we be, so, in the business that they're in.
Charles, I have some questions and I have some serious concerns, to be honest with you. So one of them that really attracts my attention is they want to go from a 7 a.m. to a 9 p.m. Monday through Sunday operation to a 24-hour-a-day operation. Why?
I think that they're anticipating that being a testing laboratory and one of the first ones to get licensed, they're going to have a high volume at the very beginning. So I think I don't know why, other than it's a business decision, but it's suggesting to me that the reason is because if there is only one or only two testing laboratories, they're going to be doing all the testing for all the retail sales and the cultivators, and so that's why they're looking to go around the clock.
Well,
We don't have to agree to that. We could push back on that issue if you're so inclined.
speaking for myself, I have an issue with that because, in no disrespect to you, I think is not an answer. You know, why are they looking to go 24 hours a day? I would like to know the answer to that question.
Okay?
And the other thing that I have serious concerns with, and I understand where you're coming from, you call this host agreement bare bones. I don't like signing anything that's bare bones. I want to know, and if we have to bring them, and this is my opinion, if we have to bring them in and they explain to us what they're going to do for this community, but for them to say, well, we think we're going to invest in a science project, we think we might invest in substance abuse, we might work on the intersections, I think, and I'm not trying to be difficult on them, but I need to know, so when I sign my name to this document, I know what the people in the town of Milford are getting from Pro Verde. You know, and I agree with you. You know, I looked at this for a while and earlier, and it seems to me it's almost carbon copy. It's like they took an agreement, just filled it out, okay, and you know, I cannot in good faith put my name on a document that is not specific, especially in a case like this.
So I have two responses to that. First of all, that I understand your sentiments. It's not far from where we started. We've been working to try to get some sort of a firm commitment from them as to what their commitment to Milford will be. The problem is that there's only so much that we can require of them in terms of impact. And a lot of the things, when we start looking for programming and things like that, that's really impact related. And in order to get an impact benefit, we have to show an actual impact. If we're looking for something else, then that's something that would have to be outside of the scope of this. I will tell you that the summary of what they have committed to is in the email that I presented to you. That is not the same sorts of things to which they've committed to us verbally. But I have to rely not on what they've told us, but what I have in writing. This is coming from their attorney, not from them. We did have a meeting with them, but this is coming from their attorney. So with respect to working with the schools and things like that, I'm not sure that that is something that we can demand of them as part of this agreement based upon the fact that impact is related to, impacts on the community and things like that, or benefits that they receive that others aren't receiving. That would have to be a side agreement, and that's how we've tried to keep those sorts of discussions as a side agreement. Well, we're working on a host community agreement. By the way, can you do other things? But in terms of the bare bones, what we've inserted, or what I'm hoping to insert by way of the discussions tonight, are all the things that are commitments to the community. In other words, the things that they provide to us are the things that basically are our commitment to them. We'll let them stay, we'll let them work, they have to comply with zoning, all those other sorts of things. But there's nothing in there that says, for example, that they have to have the security that the state law requires. Now, we know in order for them to be licensed and continue their licensure,
statute.
they've got to have it, but nonetheless, we'd like it in our host community agreement, so therefore, if they don't have it and there's a violation, we can take some action on our own part. But the commitment for, working with Board of Health, the police and so forth on addiction, on those sorts of issues are not in this agreement, and they can be, clearly, because they're within the guidelines of the Cannabis Control Commission. My intent is to insert them.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure what else we can get.
No, I just want to say, you bring up a lot of valid points. I'm under the understanding, and obviously, if you're not comfortable signing, then you shouldn't and we shouldn't. But I think, if we get all of these things that you talked about, or they talked about, saying that they're going to do something in the schools, to be honest with you, I kind of have a problem thinking that we're going to make a testing facility go out there and spend money and invest in addiction and things of that nature. I think that's the stuff I was looking for when we were looking at the retailers. Personally, I find it very different that the amount of money that they're going to make testing, and I wish them well, they're a Milford company, I want them to be super successful, but these aren't the ones that are going to be selling it and are at a real point of making some serious money. Right. So I don't want to find out that we're kind of comparing them as we are to the retailers.
Yeah, they're not a retailer, they're not a cultivator. All they're doing is receiving other people's product and testing it for purity and so forth, making sure it meets the.
So I don't look at them and thinking that we're gonna look to them to improve intersections or anything of that nature.
They're also on Fortune Boulevard.
Yeah, what I think, yeah, exactly, and that's where we want them. I think that, if they made a commitment to you verbally that they want to start something in the schools, then they said that, and if you can get that in here, then we should do that. And I think that's where we decide to either put this on, on the back burner until we know whether or not that's going to be included. I don't want them to miss out on the next application deadline over that, but I think that if there's things we want answered, but I personally do not want to hold them accountable as we did the retailer.
I don't think we can deny them the host community agreement because they're not doing programming in the school. I think that they have to run two separate courses, because if you start to connect the dots between one and the other, then we're violating the whole purpose of having these host agreements, whereby the only thing we can get in terms of financial benefit is for a benefit or an impact, a benefit that we provide or an impact that's imposed on us.
And that's why I said the things that I said earlier, because I don't see how we're going to have an impact other than a Milford company hopefully doing better than they're doing today.
And they will have to continue to comply with all of the local regulations, bylaws, in particular zoning bylaws for, marijuana establishment. So that's not obviated by the fact that they have the host agreement, and they have to comply with all the licensure requirements as well. One thing I will bring to your attention, we could adopt a local excise tax or a local option tax, and it is on the second page. So if there was some basis that you wanted to say, well, you know, we want to make sure that we're getting our fair share, you can do a local option tax of up to 3%. That is another thing that'd be available to us, but that's down the road.
No, and I appreciate that, and I probably won't support that either, but what we could do also is not do it for 5 years, do it for a shorter amount of time, see if there's impact, see if there's anything like that. Like, I'd be surprised if a testing facility on Fortune Boulevard is gonna have impacts to our community.
Well,
This is in a neighborhood, maybe.
One of the things Administrator Vellani and I were talking to them about is the fact that, you know, what if there is a fire? What are the health risks inherent in that? If there's a plume because there's an explosion in there, you know, and there's fallout, what are the impacts from that? How could we mitigate those? If there's a spill, how could we mitigate that?
And I think
What
out of
about
all the things
stormwater?
they test there, when I was there, I think the least we have to worry about is
What we were finding out that.
marijuana burning in a
Yeah,
fire rather
yeah.
than all other chemicals and things of that nature, so.
What we found out was there's really very little in terms of that, so we were thinking about, you know, is there like one of those temporary dams that we could purchase for the fire department or the police department? And we really couldn't come up with much in that, in terms of that.
Yeah, I
Of
would've been
course,
surprised if you
that's
did.
just a few of us sitting in the room talking about it. If the selectmen have better ideas, that's fine too.
No, and I take it for granted, because I've been through there, and, you know, when we
Yeah.
went through this whole thing with the retail marijuana, Chris Hudala reached out, went for a tour, and again, they test a number of different products and things like that from all over the world.
They are also, I'll add this as well, because Selectman Walsh has raised the issue, they are also looking to expand their space. Their rental space now is smaller.
Yeah, it's relatively
I
small.
think They say they're gonna double it, something like that, they're gonna double in size at the same location. There is available space there that they can continue to rent. And that may, again, because they're anticipating, you know, more product coming through, more testing being done.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure we don't hold up their process. So I want them to be a test facility. They're ranked high within the nation. I think when we talk about mitigation, I don't think there's anything to mitigate. When we had the growing facility, we received secondary effects from public safety. We had a list of things. And as a result, we created a host of community agreement that helped mitigate those secondary concerns. I also think we put additional requirements for safety security that may have been greater than statute. But when we talk about chemical controls, I'm going to tell you that if there's a fire at Lowe's and all of those weed program chemicals that are stored in Lowe's burn, they're much greater. Secondly, we have 24-hour stores, we have 24-hour gasoline stations, we have 24-hour host of things that are really business-driven. And so if they want to run 3 shifts a day because they think it's economically viable, I frankly don't care. If that's what their business model will support, good for them. There are lots of companies that run multi-shift operations. If you want to worry about environmental impacts, you have a paint manufacturer right in the center of town, that if that building were to burn, we'd have serious issues much greater than a marijuana laboratory testing facility. So my concern is any delays, because I don't have anything in front of me from public safety, and I don't know if you do, Charles. Have you received any secondary mitigation concerns or hazards that are uniquely identified associated with the testing facility from anybody in town?
No.
Okay. In the absence of those, I'd make a motion that we approve the host community agreement, take your approach that you would like to amend it down the road, and to see if you can get additional language. I want to sign the agreement in such a way that we're able to allow Proverti to begin testing. I frankly believe that the testing of legal marijuana is a public service and not a detriment to a community, and not hearing any secondary impacts or concerns to mitigate. I'm ready to move forward.
Will?
No, I'll second that.
I will not vote in favor of that.
And so take a vote. You've got a motion, a second.
Yep. Vote in favor?
All in favor? Yep.
I'm against.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good approach, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that being the purpose of the meeting and all of the required activities on the agenda, I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that.
And I would make that unanimous.